It's a win for the little guy. The fight is over, or at least almost over, right, Andre?
Yes. When the big man beats you down, the little guy stands up and fights.
So this is a really interesting story, and we got to give credit to Mercedes Streeter over at the Utopian.
Yes.
She's done a great job of following up on this years at this point long fight against small imported vehicles, and in some cases large imported vehicles from Japan.
Exactly. And the whole story is that in many states, these are outlawed. Sometimes there are shadow bans, right, where governments are not allowing people to register these little K trucks or K vans or K cars.
Yeah.
Basically, these are small vehicles from Japan that a lot of enthusiasts and some working people really appreciate.
Yeah, so this category of vehicle is K-Jidosha in Japan. And it's essentially a whole classification of car and truck and van that are very useful, extremely popular in Japan. But for a lot of years, they've been just about impossible to register in most states across the U.S. People against K vehicles often state safety as a leading factor, right?
Yeah.
They weren't ever built to U.S. standards for FMVSS certification.
Exactly. And also emissions, right?
And also emissions,
Yeah.
yeah. So for a long time, in a lot of states, it's been impossible to register these. Well, they've been gaining a huge amount of popularity. They're really entering the mainstream now, and there's been a fight against a lot of these states saying, hey, why can't I use this, right? I can import these. The feds say it's 25 years and older. You can import them. Why can't I register them? And Colorado just had a major breakthrough. But we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, and we actually own one, but we basically use it as a ranch, right? This is a vehicle that we've hauled hay with. This is a vehicle that can hold about 1,000-pound bale and actually move it around the ranch and do some work.
Yeah.
And they're not high-speed vehicles, right? These are not vehicles you drive cross country necessarily because they're not super powerful. They have, a 660 cc engine, which is not very powerful, but we've done several videos.
Yep, usually limited to about 87 miles an hour. And there's all sorts of shapes and sizes. And we'll talk about this gentleman right here, our buddy Larry, who's been importing these for a long time. They're just such fantastically useful small vehicles that hold a lot. They're cheap to buy. You can typically buy them in Japan for, in some cases, under $1,000 US. Have them imported here, and you're only a few $1,000s into them, and then you've got a great vehicle. But for a long time, a lot of states said, no, you can't drive these on the road. Georgia, for example, has been one that's been in the news, in some cases even pulling registrations, depending on the state, right? They were allowed, and then nope, they're not allowed. That's happened across the JDM world.
Exactly.
But Colorado, Andre, is doing something pretty cool.
Yeah, so there's a new bill, and there's information that's been transmitted that Governor Polis will soon sign a bill allowing registrations of these little K vans, K trucks, K cars.
Yeah.
And so this is partially coming also from Colorado Public Radio. And but like you said, the people who are against this talk about emissions often and often safety.
Yeah, and one of the primary organizations that has been fighting against not only K-vans but also old military vehicles, right, for a long time is an administration called the AAMVA. The American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators.
How do you remember this?
Good memory, right? But these guys are really interesting because they're
right there, AAMVA.
They're a non-government organization that attempts to give guidelines to DMVs and states across the country, and they've got a whole bunch of guidelines, right, that you can check out their website. But one of the things that they've been fighting against for a long time are these K vehicles, citing issues with safety and legality, right, and saying that they shouldn't be allowed. And Colorado has been an interesting state, right? And Larry Camera, who we showed earlier, right? He's been importing these things for years. He's got a bunch of them. And for a long time in Colorado, there were very vague rules surrounding K vehicles. And in a lot of instances, you could register them depending on the DMV, but you couldn't necessarily get final place without going through emissions. And then what Larry is finding is certain emission testing stations would allow you to test them, others wouldn't. So it was this really wishy-washy situation. Yeah. And the word we see referred to a lot is shadow banned, right?
Yeah.
Where it's not explicitly said, no, you cannot emission test your K-variant vehicle to get license plates. It just wasn't officially, people weren't able to go through the official routes to make it happen.
Exactly. So it was a lot of gray area, right? A lot of kind of uncertainty, and that seems to be changing. Colorado is at the forefront of this. We are in Colorado. That's why it's important to us. So it could be very interesting. But I am a fairly tall dude. I'm a pretty big guy. I have trouble sometimes fitting in our K truck.
Sure.
But these K vans are actually fairly roomy.
Yeah.
You can actually get into them. But this little guy, the Honda Acti, when I drive it, my knee hits the blinker often.
Yeah, they're a little tight for sure. Yeah. But they prove to be like, for example, for ranch use, I use ours around our private property all the time on a weekly basis, just moving dirt, moving rocks, moving flowers around this weekend.
Like
trash. I use it as the trash machine. Yeah, I load it full of trash. And they're really fuel efficient, and they go just fast enough. Like we said, you're not going to be doing 75, 80 miles an hour in this, but at 55 or under, they're perfect. And that's actually, as reading through the proposed Colorado bill, that was one of the stipulations, that yes, these are going to be allowed on the street. They're going to have to go through a 2-stage idle test for emissions, and they can only be used on roads with speed limits under 55 miles an hour.
So like secondary roads.
Secondary roads,
yes.
Yeah. And it was going
Perfect.
It's going to be like, I think, a Class B misdemeanor or something if you were to take it on the interstate.
Well,
right?
You don't want to see it, on I-70 going towards ski resorts at 30 miles an hour, huffing and puffing, and you got gigantic pickup trucks and buses and other trucks, trying to go around it. You don't want to see that.
The reason that this is such a big deal is last year, and Mercedes Streeter over the Utopian has great write-ups about all this. Last year, Colorado was very anti-K-truck, right?
Yeah.
And there were proposed bills to ban not only K-trucks, but a whole plethora of other Japanese vehicles outright. And the state got so much pushback from enthusiasts. You guys did such a good job of fighting back against this that they actually dropped the measure, right? But now it's looking like it's gone the complete other way. And if Jared Polis does the right thing, Jared, come on, man, pull through on me. If he actually signs this into action, this would be a huge deal for enthusiasts.
Exactly. But I'm still a little bit unhappy.
Why, Andre?
Tommy? Because, yes, we focused on these pretty useful K vehicles. But what happens to other vehicles, like, let's say you want to import something like this, this beauty, a Renault, right? Is that, does that have to follow similar, there's a little bit of gray area here as well, isn't there?
And there still is, right? And this has always been the problem with legalizing imported vehicles, or I should say, making certain vehicles illegal to register. Is like, we have a Fiat 500 in the lobby with a teeny tiny engine that does maybe 39 miles an hour. That was completely legal to import. You might see it behind us. But a K-truck wasn't. Even though a K-truck has modern brakes, disc brakes, modern fuel injection, pollutes way less. So there's been these discussions like, why are certain vehicles legal, certain vehicles aren't legal? And what this bill does is that at least it starts to clarify that, like, hey, we understand this.
Common sense, right?
Right.
It's using common sense, which is important. I'm still unhappy.
Why are you still unhappy?
Because owners of Buhankas are really left in the dust.
You're the only one, Andre. Andre's the only owner.
So yes, I may be one of the only owners, but I've talked to recently, last week, I talked to a second owner who lives in New Jersey who also has a Buhanka.
So Andre, this is an interesting question. Have you had any issues with your imported Buhanka?
Yes, a lot of issues.
Okay.
So I imported it. It's actually kind of a 4-seater with a truck, kind of area in the back of this van.
It's much bigger than a K van.
So it's a much bigger than a K van. Also, I had to, I was allowed to test for emissions.
Okay.
I failed.
Okay.
Badly. So I had other issues, but it was not easy because, for example, in the Soviet Union era, the VIN, the way they put VIN numbers on vehicles was not quite, always reliable.
Sure.
Sometimes it would be on the chassis, sometimes it would be on the body, sometimes it wouldn't be exactly the same way in the paperwork. And of course, Colorado and other states are very precise. The VIN has to match. So it was very difficult. And I don't want to commute in this. I want to take it to a car show. So my use case is very different. I don't want to put it to work. I don't want to, haul hay with this. I just want to enjoy it on the weekend. I don't know, as a collector vehicle.
Sure, right. And it's interesting. So Andre was able to legally register it, but he's stuck because he can't get emissions done, right?
Yeah.
And there's another guy, and not in Colorado, but Jay Leno, has been a big proponent of what's being dubbed Leno's Law,
Yeah.
which is essentially
This guy.
Yes, a rollback on classic car emissions requirements. So Colorado follows the same rules as California, and in California and Colorado, any vehicle post 1975 has to be emissions tested, right?
Yes.
At least an idle test, and then it goes to a roller test at some point. And what Leno's Law is saying is this is an absurd requirement because these cars represent a tiny percentage of cars on the road that aren't being daily driven.
Yeah.
And that 1975 is not a rolling date, right? It's been 1975
It's frozen.
4 years.
Yeah, it's frozen at that.
So he's proposing we have a rolling date, and I think it's 35 years.
Yeah, it says right here, 35 years. So right now it's 2025. So anything 1990 and on, or before 1990, could actually be okay.
And this law makes perfect sense to me being in Colorado as well, because what people end up happening is they're in Andre's position where they have a cool, interesting, classic enthusiast vehicle that they can't get through emissions. Their solution is not to take that vehicle off the road. Their solution is to go register it in South Dakota or Montana.
Or other states or counties maybe.
And what ends up happening is places like California and Colorado end up losing on all of that revenue, right? And they're not really saving the environment to a great extent because these cars are never driven. They're very, very rarely driven. Usually a way around this that I've heard talked about is you could register them as classic vehicles so they have a mileage cap, right? So they're not polluting that much.
Yeah.
Not that they would be anyways. But I am totally on board with this. I think Colorado needs to adopt this too because I've sat in line before in my classic Mini at an emissions place. I'm like, I drive this car 200 miles a year. Why am I sitting here struggling to get this thing through emissions?
And you're nervous.
Yeah.
You know, and the car was never built to the current standards, right?
Right.
I mean, the car is 30 years old, 35 years old, 40 years old. The standards are way different. Just enjoy it,
Right.
Allow people to enjoy a car.
And part of the issue too I have with Colorado is like emissions testing are done through Air Care Colorado, which is a privately owned company that you have to go to in order to get your car registered, right? And my other issue is it's only the certain counties around Denver. So it's weird, if you live in Summit County, you're fine, right? If you live in Boulder County...
Weld County, no such emissions.
Yeah, so it's
also.
like these arbitrary kind of lines.
Well, it's not arbitrary. I think it's related to population centers.
Okay, I understand.
Right,
Sure.
So in Denver County, I mean, there's 1 million people, 2 million, 3 million people there.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of get it, people walking to work may not want to smell a 1990, I don't know, smelly car. But, I mean, there has to be some reasonable compromise, right?
Sure, right. Anyways, folks, so we thought we'd update you on this. It's really cool. Check out the Autopian and Mercedes Streeter's work. She goes way more in depth than we do, and she's going to keep going up on the story, I'm sure. But please, Jared, just sign the bill. It looks perfect. It's got a bunch of sponsors, and it would mean that enthusiasts are able to drive these small, efficient K vehicles instead of buying a big old diesel truck.
Also affordable.
She's helping everyone, yeah.
Also affordable vehicles. That's a big point because a lot of new vehicles and used vehicles are very expensive, right?
And probably not unsurprisingly, one of the groups that's very anti-K vehicle in Colorado is the dealer organizations, right? Yeah, they're one of the folks that have been really pushing hard against it. And in my opinion, one of the reasons is because it represents a small, affordable threat to
their business.
To their business, right? Because these cars are cheap and they're easy to drive and very reliable. And the competition against a big truck, a new truck.
But eventually, you may trade in your K truck on another vehicle.
Maybe, Andre, yeah.
Or maybe never.
Maybe never. Well, folks, let us know what you think in the comment section below.
And thanks for joining us. And check out oldtfl.com where we have everything we do in one place.
Yep.
Right there.
For sure. We'll see you guys next time.